Hello and good day to you all, wherever you are. We're on gunner time tonight, so I hope we're actually bang on time. I know I've got a fellow soldier with me tonight, Dave. So we'll see how the night goes. Now, for those who don't know me, I'm Alistair Scott, a past president of the Society, but now as chair of the events committee, I try to keep all our events and activities going. It's great to have so many of you here tonight for tonight's fascinating talk. This is the British Interplanetary Society's 20th live streamed evening lecture since the start of the first lockdown in 1st of March last year. Sorry, 23rd of March last year. As you may know, our next major event is in 2 weeks' time, 28th to 30th of June. And yes, it's the Reinventing Space Conference, and it's going ahead as planned in the QE2 Conference Centre in Westminster, despite the extension to the lockdown announced on Monday. The outline program is now available on the website and tickets are now also on sale. As the conference centre's rooms are so large, they're able to accommodate most of our delegates with full social distancing. And for others, the whole event will be available online. We think it will be one of the first live face-to-face conferences in London. So I look forward to seeing you all there. So tonight we're going to be using the Crowdcast system. Now, most of you know it already. We'll be using it for both the presentation and the Q&A. So most of you are familiar with it. And please use the chat box for your networking and the question box at the bottom of the page for your questions and answers. As you know, by clicking on the Ask the Question box, you can see all the questions being asked and can vote up the questions that you want to go to the top. So get them in quickly so that more people can get the chance to vote. If you enjoy this evening and want to make a small donation, please click on the donate button at the bottom of the page. Every little helps to cover the cost of these lectures. I'm extremely pleased to say that Gurbir Singh is with us tonight, a fellow of the Society, and he is going to, I think, be introduced by Dave Shayler, because this really is an extension to the, I would say probably a supplement to the 41st China-Russian Technical Forum. So I think we've got a little bit of feedback. I'm going to hand over to Dave now and pull out so that it's probably my PC that's causing the problem. Over to you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. I think it might be.
I'm terribly sorry to everybody. I'm terribly sorry to Dave. This is Elizabeth from BISHQ. The feedback is actually coming from your side. So if you could just make sure you've got your speakers turned down, that would be great.
That better?
That is
that
much
better?
Thank you. That is much better. Thank you very much.
Okay. This is the new technology.
And it's going again.
There you go. How's that?
Perfectly every time, but
Okay.
not performance.
You all right now? Great. Let me introduce myself. My name's Dave Shayler, and I have been with the Society for, getting on for 45 years. And over the last 10 years, I've been lucky to host what we used to be called the Soviet Chinese Technical Forum. It's now called the Russian Sino Forum. And that occurs every June, first weekend of June. And that's been since 1980. And during that time, over the weekend, we have guest speakers and also enthusiasts who want to give papers on various aspects of their research or their interest on the Soviet, Chinese, and even Indian space program. And we're particularly honored tonight, really, to have Gurbir with us, who's been a friend and a colleague for several years and an established author on the Indian space program. So he's going to give you a fascinating talk, but I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes for those of you who have never been able to come to London to see the forum, just to run through a few slides about the background to the BIS forum. Let's see if we can do this. Can you see that? Too many videos. Okay, trying again. Ah, that's better. How's that? Is that better?
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave.
Speak up, Elizabeth. I can't hear you.
Yep, that's all good. We're looking
Excellent.
at it.
Okay, right. This is how we normally do the forum, and as you can see, this is from 2019. This is held in the BIS facility in London, and normally we get together on the weekend in June and have a great time with good friends, giving a range of talks about the Russian, Soviet, Chinese, and more recently Asian space program. Very informal. And what I'd like to do is just give you a bit of background to this forum and invite you to come and view it one year once we can all do this. Also, being with this new technology, we are trying to invent the program so in the future, from next year, we'll be able to broadcast it online as well. So if you can't make it to London, you at least can participate in the forum. As I said, the forum is usually held in the British Interplanetary Society headquarters in South Lambeth in London over the weekend of a Saturday and a Sunday in the first weekend of June. And it's been held since 1980. This was the gentleman who instigated this. This is Anthony Kenden, the late Anthony Kenden, unfortunately. Anthony had the idea of asking the society to set up a regular forum meeting. So like-minded people, enthusiasts, not necessarily professionals, could get together and share ideas, share presentations, to share research to the wider membership. The first meeting was in January 1980. And last year, we celebrated the 40th anniversary. And so this has been going on for 40 years. This is the 41st year. And it's become one of the most popular and the most followed programs in the society. This is from 1981. And it shows the early forums that we had. And three gentlemen in the front I want to point out. On the left is the late Phil Clark, who we lost last year. In the middle is Nick Johnson, who we lost this year. And Rex Hall, who we lost in 2010. And I'll mention these three gentlemen as we go on. But these were right at the beginning. In fact, Phil spoke at the very first forum in 1980 and at most of the forums since then up till 2019. In those days, the technology was, well, let's say basic. It was like standing at the front, reading your notes, showing a few slides, or as you can see from the left, using the overhead projector. And as you can see, the audience are nicely listening and asking questions accordingly. But this was a very basic presentation. It was very off the cuff. Some of the speakers are not professional speakers and still aren't. We encourage people who've never spoken before to try and do a talk on something that they're enthusiastic with. And that works really well. Some people who have attended the Society's forum for many years and now become regular speakers. And we encourage that. These days, it's a little bit more up to date. You see me presenting something there using the PowerPoint overhead projection. And on the right-hand side, you see the camera from Alan Marlowe, who usually videos these and then will broadcast on the Society's website. Of course, with this new technology, now we're able to do it with the crowdcasting and different methods accordingly on social platforms. So we're moving forward, trying to pull more members from around the world into these forums, because even participating or maybe even speaking in the future on one of these forums would be good using this new technology. Rexall. Rexall was the driving force for the forum in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s. He was a passionate space follower and society fellow. In fact, he became the president of the society, and he was a recognized expert on the Soviet cosmonaut team. In fact, it has been said that Rex knew more about the cosmonauts than even the cosmonauts themselves. But Rex was the driving force to get these forums organized, to manage them, to get the speakers to do the talks, and encourage the promotion of the society's forum to the wider membership. By doing that, he brought in what became known as the usual suspects. Several of us were encouraged to keep on giving talks every year over the years. And in one of the society's magazines, the Space Chronicle, some years ago, I wrote about the history of the society's forum and the number of speakers and how many each speaker had presented papers. And Rex was key to that. And for many years, we actually followed Rex in this promotion of this forum. He has been sadly missed for the last decade, but as you can see, this forum continues. I now look after the organisation and the management of it and promoting it, and this is why I wanted to do this presentation today. Some of us got together a few years ago to put our stories of following the Soviets into a book, courtesy of Dom Phelan, who's in the middle here, holding the book, which you can see the cover on the right. The Cold War Space Sleuths. All of us were enthusiastic about following the Soviets in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and the benefit of being one of what was known as the sleuths was sharing information, not for the glory of it, but just for the fun of sharing the information between good friends and finding out that little snippet of information, that little snippet of a new photograph. Don't forget, this started in the days before the internet, before this social media, where handwriting and photographs were very prolific, and letter writing was very to the fore. And it took a long time to find even the most easiest and simplest information between us. Of course, it's not all work. We do have some relaxation. On the left here, you see a pub called the Mason Arms in Maddox Street in London. There's a reason why it's on this presentation. It's that pub where the original BIS members met in the 1930s when the society moved from Liverpool down to London. So as a tradition now, on a Friday evening, some of us gather at the pub to follow that tradition, that link to the Mason Arms. And you can see Phil Clark there at the front in the black T-shirt, opening his wallet. Your speaker tonight, Gerber, looking at Bert, scanning the menu, and Martin Postranaki, another regular, looking on. And the guy up at the bar is me. No need to say any more, really. But as you can see, we do have some fun and some enjoyment in these forums as well. It is a tradition. One of the things that we really wanted to do for many years in the forum was actually get Russians to participate. It's great doing a forum on the Soviet, the Russians, or even the Chinese. It's even better if you can actually get a Russian to come and talk at the forum. And this was one of the first people to do that. This is a Russian rocket engineer, Oleg Sokolov, and he became a firm friend of ours over several talks and several years. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but we now dedicate a paper of any Russian that would give a delivery of a paper at the Society's forum. It would be under Oleg's name. And we did get the achievement of having cosmonauts at the forum. The podium at the front here from the left, you see Afanasyev, and then Alexei, who's our translator, and Anatoly Artsebarsky, and Sergei Kriklev. Those three cosmonauts were here with Helen Sharman, who's attended, and doing a talk to the presentation of the society. So as you can see, we've actually had cosmonauts giving talks at the Russian Sino Forum. which has been a great achievement. And we have a regular, Anatoly comes several times when he's able, of course. It hasn't been possible recently, but it is good fun to hear firsthand some of the experiences of Russian cosmonauts, especially for us sleuths who used to investigate it more secretly many years ago. Also in the program, we also have some extra items. We have this is a real Soyuz simulator, and the program we use to let people try this out, and this is in the BIS headquarters, and so it's quite good fun in the breaks to try this out, try your skills at docking as the cosmonauts practice on for real. We also encourage you to join the library and actually visit the library, which is at the BIS headquarters in London. It is a very extensive library, and you can see Brian Harvey sitting down and myself going through some documents. If you ever get the chance of coming down to London, it is well worth a visit. You have to be in conjunction with the society staff, but there is a vast amount of information here for those who want to research and follow up some of their studies, especially with some of the older documents that are not online. As I call it, digging in the dust. Some of the most valuable information can be found by searching through some of these documents in the society. And then we also have some fun items. This is one of the auctions that we do to try and raise funds for the society. And this is from a few years ago, and Bert and I are trying to auction a couple of the books here to gain the funds to help the society in their activities. And we encourage that as well. It is good fun. Now, before we close, I just want to mention a few of the people that I mentioned earlier. This is Phil Clark, of course. Phil passed away in October of last year, and as we said, Phil presented a paper at nearly every single meeting in the 40 years that the program's been running. He also contributed to many, many publications and wrote the book that you see the cover of on the right-hand side that many of you probably have in your own library. It's been decided that traditionally Phil always gave the last presentation of the program, either on a Saturday or a Sunday. So in future, the speaker who will give the last talk will do it under the Phil Clark memorial paper. Also, if we have a brand new speaker, we've decided that will come under the Anthony Kenden memorial paper. So we're trying to bring the history in, as well as encourage and promote new speakers and new participants in the Society's forum. Another dear friend we lost this year was American Nick Johnson. Nick was one of the world authorities of space debris, and he passed away earlier in this year. I think it was in April, and he visited the Society to do talks at the presentation, the forum twice. And he was known also for producing in the 80s these annual Soviet reports that became quite collectible. And he's another sad loss to the Society. Next year, hopefully, a date for your diary. 11th and 12th of June, we hope to be back at the Society in London and giving a presentation in person plus online to help bring us back to what we're formerly used to as giving one-to-one presentations over the weekend, which would be great fun. Sometimes we do have a special event on a Friday evening, depending on the guests. The cosmonauts have done something on the Friday evening, and so we can expand it to the Friday evening sometimes. But usually it's on the Saturday and the Sunday. On the right here, you see the cover of the new look magazine Space Chronicle, which is now the Society's history magazine that I am the editor of. In April, we did an article on the 50th anniversary of the Salyut space station. But if you'd like to contribute to this magazine and would like to see something of yourselves in writing, then please contact me through the BIS. I encourage new members, new writers to participate, and we can give you all the help we can to get your things published. 50 years ago, I was fortunate to have the support and the encouragement from Ken Gatland to do this. And I'd like to encourage that more with the current members and younger members of the Society. So in closing, and before we hand over to Gurbir, What I'd like to do is just invite you in any way you can to participate in future forums. It is a great get-together, real good fun. We have interesting guests, fascinating talks, and a chance to catch up. And we do welcome you when we're allowed to be back in the Society's building. In the meantime, of course, I'll stop sharing this and bring in Gurbir and introduce Gurbir, who's going to be your main speaker today. Gurbir will give his presentation on the state of the Indian space program during the last 12-18 months and possibly the prospect for the future of the program in the immediate future. Thank you for your listening and welcome to your evening speaker today, Gurbir.
Well, David, that was very comprehensive and detailed. Thank you very much indeed. You should be able to see my screen now, I hope. Can you confirm that, Elizabeth?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Lovely. Great. Hey, it's great to see so many comments in the comments section. Some witty ones, which I think Dave might have missed, about a real simulator. It's a question that you have to address later, David. Great to see so many familiar names. I saw on the comments, Steve, Bert, Fabrizio, who I've yet to meet, but Steve Salmon, who I'm sure is still basking in the Italian sun out there. Great to see so many of you. Appreciate your time for joining us now. So what I want to do is talk for about 45 minutes or so, and feel free to ask questions, as Dave said. And I also should just add that these Sino Russian Forums, as they're called now, I've been attending them for about 10 years, and I don't really talk about China or indeed Russia, but usually squeeze in something tangentially related to the Indian space program, and I've been doing that for quite a while. Now, especially that we're moving on to this digital platform, if you want to join some of the great contributors, like Asif Siddiqui, who you might have seen in the picture there, or Brian Harvey, and indeed Dave Shayler, who's a prolific writer, if you haven't seen any of his books. It's a great resource, great place to get together. Do feel free to contact either Dave or me, and I can suggest how you might be able to join us, whether it's live in London or digitally from wherever you are. And it's fairly free in terms of the subject matter, because I know that many of you here will be specialists and experienced people in whichever area you're in. And on that front, do feel free to add your questions whenever you want. I wish I could guarantee I'll answer them all, but I'll certainly give it a go. And the chat window and the question window apparently are separate, so just be aware of that. Dave will come back and we'll go through the questions near the end. So I am going to talk to you about the Indian space program and particularly how it's faring through the COVID-19. Why I'm doing that? Well, I'm sure you know we've all had a very different and challenging 18 months or so, no matter where you are in the world. And I particularly, when I was writing this book, a very quick introduction. Some of you probably wondering who the hell I am. So I wrote this book, which was published in 2017, but it took me about 5 or 6 years to do the research. And during that time, I made 3 visits to India, to various places in India, and met many of the people who I've been following online since. And I was particularly touched to see how tough a time India was going through with COVID-19 pandemic. And I was keen to see how, well, I felt for many of the people who were out there. And I know that it's been quite difficult, particularly the huge loss of life that we've had here in the UK and in many other parts of the world. So what I want to do is just be aware that there will be naturally issues to do with the fact that there's many things that in the space program India, ISRO is behind with. Sure, that's going to be inevitable, but there are good reasons for that. And it's not all doom and gloom. I've got a couple of things which are quite positive activities that are taking place within the Indian space program, which I think you would like to know about. And of course, I will share, give you an introduction to the background to what are the other things that are going on, especially if this subject matter is new to you. So what I'd like to do in this plan, it's highly organized, as you can see. So I want to talk about the COVID, the impact of the pandemic within the space activities in general, not just ISRO. And one of the things that I want to highlight is that ISRO itself has been instrumental in providing some of the support within to the many various places within India in terms of providing oxygen. Because one thing that all space agencies do is make huge quantities of oxygen. And that's been one of the shortage around the world, but particularly in India. And ISRO has played its part. One of the things that you might have missed, and I think this is true for because of the pandemic, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. This just hasn't been covered. And I want to talk about the Indian private space sector, which is coming along really leaps and bounds, naturally slowed down because of the pandemic. And one of the things that's making it possible is that the local legislation that's necessary, national legislation that's necessary, in India it's called the Space Activities Bill. In the US it was called the Space Act. It allows commercial players to practice various forms of space activities in India. You've probably heard of the Artemis Accords. I'll touch on that because it's been in the news quite recently. Not very long, just one slide on that. And the flagship program, Gaganyaan, the human spaceflight program, which was announced in 2017, just want to bring you up to date with how that's faring. ISRO, or the Indian government through the Department of Space, produce a report every year, an annual report, and there was one came out earlier this year, and I just want to touch on what was published then. And of course, since then, there's been another wave which has slowed down in things even more. And then I'll conclude with a bit of what I think will be the way out, which will hopefully be not too far away. So just bear the following in mind as I go through. This is not a product of some research or a particular project I've been working on. It's just some personal view, looking at what I've been learning through the open sources and personal contacts. I was born in India. I still have many contacts in India. And of course, with many of the contacts that I made whilst I was doing my research. So there's nothing that I'm going to hope, you don't expect any revelations from me in terms of new information in that respect. And I think most of us, I think it's true to say that most of us are fans of space. And it doesn't really matter who launches a rocket to Mars, or put a rover on the moon, or a country introduces a new astronaut to the International Space Station. But just be aware, I do want to acknowledge that behind the story that I'm going to be sharing with you, particularly in India, there has been, as is elsewhere in the world, many personal tragedies, a lot of suffering, and that's still got some time to play out. So I will get carried away with all the space and exciting elements, but just bear in mind that there are some personal stories of very sensitive nature in the background. And the other thing I want to mention is that some of the things I will talk about, everything is provisional, it's tentative. The pandemic isn't over. How things will pan out in the next few weeks and months, perhaps even before that, by the end of the year, that will determine certainly the rate of recovery and what happens and when it happens. I also want to share with you some sources that I use. If this area of the Indian space program is new to you, there's lots of sources. I've just put a few on the screen, and I put them in the long form. So if you are watching this on the video, on the recording, you can just read the texts. But if anybody is interested in this presentation, I'm happy to just send me an email, and I'm happy to send you a copy. But there's a Reddit group, very active, and there's a very quiet and self-effacing guy who runs it. I've never met him. He's called Osin. I'm assuming that's his full name and not a handle, but he's incredibly talented, and he's been associated with this Reddit since the outset, since I remember. But of course, there are many other people who make it work. But as a source of information and debate and a lot of ready-made links, Reddit is a place to go. There's also a New Space India. This is a website run by a guy called Narayan Prasad. He has a website, a Telegram group, or he set it up, and he does a podcast. Now, his podcast, again, a really good source of what's happening, particularly in the private space sector in India. The New Space India podcast is where you want to go to find out which are the current startups in India, what they're doing, and I'll mention a few of them as we go today. And there's a couple of really good writers who I just read online. They have newsletters. There's Jatan Mehta and a guy called Pradeep Mohandas. And if you're into videos, I don't know his name, but he has a YouTube channel which is very successful. But I think about 200,000 followers on there right now. That's the Gurbir Scientist link that you can see there. And then finally, ISRO, of course, does have a website. Unfortunately, most people who, this includes everybody in that list and me, who are fans of ISRO, find that website frustrating. Most of the social media communication has historically, for years, nothing to do with the pandemic, has been fairly weak. And that's why these sources above make up the deficit. Feel free to, and of course I blog and podcast on some of these topics as well. So, just in case Indian space program is news to you, just a quick overview. So it was founded in 1962, not 61 as it says there. And the first rocket launch from Indian soil to go into space was a sounding rocket. That was in 1963. ISRO has about 17,000 employees and around 20 major centers, and I'll show you a map of some of them. And some of these are very large, some of them are very small, so 20 main centers. The three main ones are the Space Applications Center. That's way over on the west coast in Gujarat state. The Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, way down south in Kerala. And the Shah, this is the Sriharikota or Satish Dhawan Space Center, where all the launches take place on the east coast near Chennai, Madras, as it used to be called. Currently, India has about 50 operational spacecraft in orbit. They include Earth observation, communication, and regional spelling error, navigation. The rather global positioning satellite system. This is the regional one, NAVIC in India. But also, India's got right now an operational spacecraft in orbit around Mars. Another one around the Moon, Chandrayaan-2, and the Space Telescope in low Earth orbit, AstroSat. It has a history of collaborating with the USSR and Russia now, USA, France, Japan, Brazil, and it's launched satellites for around 30 different countries on a commercial basis, of course. It has an annual budget. Now you'll find I've got quite a few figures that I'll share with you throughout some of these slides. But figures, as I think most of you would know, it's very difficult to be precise about how much, particularly budgets and costs things are. So don't take this as gospel, but the figure that I will share with you in the report for this year is 1.8 billion US dollars, and that covers the whole of the program in India, compared to about 20 plus billion for NASA and about 6 or 7 billion for China. So not a great deal of money, but it does do quite a lot, and it's been doing quite a lot with very small amounts of money. One of its unique selling points. So a quick view of what the current situation is in India regarding COVID. This is state of play globally and in India in terms of number of confirmed cases and number of deaths. The key thing I want you to take away from here is the fact that the peaks are now declining. We seem to be, as in most countries, in India as well, on the downward slope. It's been a huge impact, as indeed it has been for many countries, along with the shortage of oxygen, that the hospitals being overstretched, GDP, the tourist industry, government income from taxes has gone down, tourism industries collapsed, hospitality sector. Pretty much what's been happening elsewhere in the world has been happening in India as well. And currently the vaccine rollout is fairly low. Approximately about 3.5% of the population of India have had both jabs, about 15% for at least one. So there is some time to go by the time the vaccination program is complete, but it's good to see that the numbers are decreasing. These numbers are from the World Health Organization. I grabbed them earlier on today. So you're thinking, okay, Gurbir, this sounds like a World Health Organization COVID briefing, but I just wanted to put that in the picture. Now I'll just take you across to how that has been impacting India, particularly ISRO. So first thing to note is that the impact in northern India has been much more severe than in southern India. Unfortunately, most of the larger ISRO centers are located in the south. And I'll just take you through a very quick trip around India on this map. So Vikram Sarabhai Space Center is this way down south, tip of India. It's based in the state of Kerala, the capital of which is this town, the Thiruvananthapuram. And that's where you might recall a place called Thumba, which was the first launch center that India had, where the sounding rockets were launched in the 60s and 70s. That site, incidentally, the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center is huge. It spans all over and incorporates that launch center. And Thiruvananthapuram is a state capital, which is and the only reason, if you think the only reason I'm saying it is because I'm trying to show off, yes, you're right, because it used to be called Trivandrum, and I used to call it Trivandrum because I just couldn't say Trivandrum for a very long time. I think I'm doing a bit better now. So that's where, that's the largest in terms of employees location is for ISRO. Here is Sriharikota, or Satish Dhawan Space Center, or SHAR. Every spacecraft that's been launched into Earth orbit or beyond has left India from Sriharikota. And here's the one I mentioned earlier, Space Applications Center. It's in Ahmedabad in Gujarat over here. And when I was doing my research, I visited all those centers, and of course Bangalore, where the headquarters is for ISRO. And I also went to Calcutta, and indeed all the way up to Sikkim. So it's because of that contact, I was quite touched by the difficulties that India was going through. All the reports in terms of the caseloads and fatalities are numbers in the press, and numbers in the press and the numbers coming from other sources are always uncertain for various reasons. One of them is that when there is a pandemic, it's very difficult to get the correct statistics. But generally speaking, Israel has suffered. Many places within, particularly in Sriharikota, have 400 cases were reported in one instance I saw, about a dozen deaths, again, from Sriharikota. But on the plus side, one of the sites it's a very small site, which I didn't visit, is called Mahendragiri. And that's very close, as you can see, to Kerala. And that's where all of the LOX, liquid oxygen, and the liquid hydrogen produced for the propulsion for the launchers. They're actually produced here, and then they're transported by road all the way to Sriharikota prior to launch. And it is here where the oxygen was produced and made available, particularly in Kerala and elsewhere. ISRO also produced some ventilators to help with the medical emergency. It's most of the sites are working at least with about 50% staff there. Social distancing, as we have here in the UK, is implemented. It's very difficult, but people are getting on with what they can get on with under the circumstances. So the situation is, in most cases, most of the projects are delayed, and that was inevitable. But I want to just share with you, and I'm going to use a yardstick of the number of launches as a yardstick to measure the impact of the pandemic. Just to put you in the right picture here, just have a look at this. These are the number of launches from India, from Sriharikota going to Earth orbit or beyond, ever. That's right. So 78 launches altogether since its founding. And it was in 1979, the SLV-3, which had the capability to put something into low Earth orbit from a launcher made in India. Prior to that, it was other launches. And as you can see, it was very slow when it started. I'll give you some numbers here. But these are all the launches, and you can see the various launch vehicles. SLV, ASLV are no longer operational. PSLV, I'm sure you've heard of that. And GSLV Mark II, only a few launches there, but the GSLV Mark III is the heavy lift launcher, which, as you can see in the blue, has had altogether 4 launches. One of them was suborbital. So I should also add, by the way, that especially prior to the arrival of the GSLV Mark III, for any spacecraft that was heavier than about 2.5 to 3 tons, ISRO traditionally used Ariane. So there's about 10 spacecraft made in and operated by India and launched by Ariane. There were also, in the early days, satellites made in India but launched by Russia, mostly Kapustin Yar in Russia. And there's one instance back in the early 80s when one of the INSAT satellites was launched from a space shuttle. But by and large, the number of launches, as you can see, is fairly low for India. So bear that in mind when we're doing the comparison. And it's also worth noting here, by the way, that one of the things that has happened, those of you familiar with the space race, and I think all of you would be, when you have a race, and I think it's quite telling, especially now that we have essentially a space race version 2.0, one side makes the other go a little bit further, and perhaps go in circumstances which, in other circumstances, we just wouldn't do. So by seeing what's happening elsewhere, this will motivate India. And I think one of the surprising things for me is how very quietly, I think it's 2019, when China had more launches than Russia and USA for the first time. Last year, China placed 39, had 39 launches, and Russia had just 17. And as you can see, last year in 2020, for India, it was just 2. So one of the things you'll see, I'll come back to in the end, is that having a very active program in China, and China is way ahead, as you can see, what's been happening there this year, that will actually be a motivating factor for India to get to start recovering back to its original status, and then of course increasing from there onwards. So I'd sort of move on now to the private sector, and remember, feel free to add questions as I'm going. And also, if you, I know some of you will have perhaps more information, more details, if you're closer to some of this than I am, do feel free to add that to the comments. All that will help anybody else watching this. And indeed, I can't see the comments just yet, but when the time comes, I will benefit from them too. In this private sector, has been really in the making for quite a few years. And there was a survey in India, PricewaterhouseCoopers survey, which indicated the space sector was worth so much, and yet we've got India has a very small percentage of that share. There are launch services providers. I won't read them all out there, but Indian space sector startups are in launch services, propulsion, satellite manufacturing, and Earth imaging. And this being held up primarily because this lack of legislation to allow them to proceed. So I'm going to big up the private space sectors, or rather the Indian government's space activities bill, which I'll mention in the next slide. But you will see that many private space sector players are still not happy with it. But there has been a commitment made from the government, and that, had it not been, I think, for the pandemic, there would have been a lot more progress made in this space. So the space sector in India, many of the startups just didn't know what they could do, when they couldn't do it, what the requirements were. So this draft of the Space Activities Bill in 2017, there's the first draft, a lot of problems with it, but it's gone back in, and last year, the finance minister and the government actually produced, made some additional commitments. There's a new startup, a new organization within the Indian space program. This is a really unusual thing. I can't quite get to my head around it, but India already had Antrix, which was the commercial arm where everybody would, from the outside or commercial customer, would get access to the launch services from India. That's still there, but now there's also another organization called the Indian National Space Promotions and Authorization Center. And if commercial operators want to make use of those services, it will be through the InSpace program that will go through that now. It's also going to be acting as a bit of a regulator, so many of the Indian startups are not happy with this, but at least the bill, once it's in place, will ensure that there is some legislative framework in place on which commercial space actors can start doing some activities. Here's the bill. It's still got plenty of problems, but it's making some headway, and I think this is one of the good news I want you to take away from this. It's not quite there yet, but this space activities bill, once it goes through, once it comes into law, it will allow the private space actors in India to actually get on with the space activities. And that, I think, will play a key role in helping to recover the space activities in India. There was some talk about the Artemis Accords in the press and why India has not joined just yet. So I think you're all aware. So Artemis Accords are a set of principles that NASA, USA, came out with. And they said, look, we, through the Artemis project, are going back to the moon with planned lunar landing in about 4 years' time, if it all goes well, and Project Artemis. And we want partners. We want partners from the private space sector, from the international places around the world. And so far, 11 countries have signed up to the Artemis Accords. It's a way of making sure that everybody works in a set of principles, which are something that can be can be placed in an international context rather than being competing against each other. India, Russia, and China have not. And I'm sure if some of you have been following the news on the Global Exploration Conference that just ended a couple of days ago, Russia and China announced their lunar exploration research station, the International Lunar Research Station, and there's going to be a division. Yeah, I'm guessing that's what it's looking like. It's unfortunate, but I think that's probably why India has not signed up with the Artemis Accords. It's going to just wait and see. And it's very early days anyway, but I suspect the main reason why India hasn't made a decision on this is just that it's not had the time to consider these types of issues just yet. There's just so much else going on. The other things you might have seen in announcement through Glex is, there's an announcement from Turkey that they're going to have an astronaut on the International Space Station. They're going to be landing a rover, or at least making a hard impact on the lunar surface. They're having lunar missions within the next 2 or 3 years. That's Turkey, a space agency that I had hardly heard of. And the United Arab Emirates, as you know, now got a spacecraft in orbit around Mars, and they're planning to go to the moon with a rover. There's just so much happening. It's really quite interesting, and hopefully there will be more international collaborative way of doing these things. Ultimately, that's the way it's going to go, particularly when projects are so big and expensive, really beyond the ability of one country. I want to move on now to the one of the flagship programs, Gaganyaan. This was the program to take the first Indian astronauts launched from India in an Indian vehicle to Earth orbit. The idea was to have a crew of 3 in low Earth orbit and recover after a splashdown in the Bay of Bengal. India's been using support from French regarding physicians and Capcom mission control teams, and also astronaut training from Russia. I think it's only a few months ago that 4 Indian astronauts came back from Russia after having completed their training. They are all Indian Air Force pilots, test pilots, and their identity remains unknown. And this is a mock-up of the kind of vehicle that they will be going on. However, just to give you a context, India, way back in 2007, conducted this space capsule recovery experiment, and that's this vehicle here. It's in the museum right now. It was in orbit for Earth orbit for about a week or 10 days, and then it was recovered again, splashed down in the Arabian Sea. And so India has launched something and recovered, has gone through that phase of developing that kind of technology. The 2017 Gaganyaan announcement, since then there was a roadmap of activities, and the idea was to have a mission of 3 people for about a week in low Earth orbit. There were many things that were going to happen before then. Not surprisingly, there's been a delay, and there was I should just mention, in 2014 there was this another mock-up crew capsule. That's this, what you see here, that was tested. This was the suborbital flight, but it was able to test the capsule re-entry and recovery from afterwards. In addition to that, in 2018, pad abort tests, and that's what you're looking at here, were conducted. There were additional tests from in-flight abort tests, which have not happened so far. The crew escape system test just hasn't happened so far. There were also supposed to be 2 uncrewed flight tests before the first crewed flight test. According to the original schedule, there should have been the first of these last December, and the second one this July, next month. But of course, that's quite a delay. So they haven't happened. So this is, I think, where we're going to be looking at in terms of, it's unlikely it'll get there on time. One of the main reasons is, I think, in addition to, although the astronauts are there, they've got their training, there's a lot of other infrastructure that just isn't in place. So I expect a delay. Want to just talk to you about a formal and official report, something that ISRO does every year. This report, this is the link. You can download this and have a look at it yourself. But some of the other prerequisites that are not normally captured in this discussion, I just want to mention. So when you have a crewed capsule, you do really want to keep in touch 24/7, ideally, all the time. Whereas with LEO and geosynchronous orbit satellites, as the Earth rotates, you don't always have that contact. And part of that requirement is the Indian Data Relay Satellite System. If you've heard of the NASA equivalent, TDRS satellites, Tracking and Data Relay Satellite Systems, which allow spacecraft, crewed spacecraft, to communicate. The first one of which was launched back in 1975, I think, ready for the Apollo Soyuz test project, if you recall that. So this is another branch of another level of infrastructure that India's been working to, again, delayed. So this IDRIS set of satellites, there are going to be 2, and they're going to be in geosynchronous orbit, so that at least it would provide a relay service to an in-ground station. And incidentally, IDRIS, NASA has them. I think the European, they're called IDRIS, quite common, just like the deep space networks, global positioning satellites. Every nation or every agency likes to have their own facilities. So IDRIS is not yet there. There's a program to launch small satellites in 2019 at the IAC in Washington. There's a presentation from ISRO. We're hoping to launch the small satellite launch vehicle. Not quite, testing isn't complete, it's not available to do just that. India's also been working on a reusable launch vehicle. It's done one simulated re-entry flight test quite a few years ago. It was due to do a drop test with a landing on a runway. This hasn't happened. The GSLV Mark III, this heavy lift launcher, it's not fully, it's in the process of, but it's not fully human rated just yet. And I was quite interested to see, incidentally, this report mentions this requirement or this project to called the Official Language Implementation Committee. And the idea is to introduce Hindi as a language across all ISRO centers. And you'll see if you go to the ISRO website, there's quite a lot of Hindi there now. It's of course quite important that all Indians have access to the information in a form that they can understand. But I was surprised to see the effort that's gone in money and resource in embedding that project. So all of these things are delayed. I'm coming to the end early. Again, I'm just covering some of the grounds. Again, you may not be familiar that, but there's although the GSLV Mark III has an upper stage, which is a cryogenic stage, hydrogen LOX are used, but India does not have a launch vehicle that uses semi-cryogenic engines. And there's been a project in place for quite a while that, again, it's fallen behind. And remember, the very first launch of Sputnik and Gagarin used semi-cryogenic engines. India just does not have that technology yet. SSLV, I've already mentioned. The escape system. There's the air breathing propulsion project. These are the supersonic and hypersonic sonic engine testing facilities that are usually tested out of Thumba, way down in the south. The second flight test of the reusable launch vehicle, this landing test I was telling you about, is also delayed. And this is something interesting, which again came out at the IAC 2019 in Washington. The PSLV fourth stage, ISRO has a project called the PS4 orbital platform in order to make use of the fourth stage, which sticks around in Earth orbit for about 6 months after it's done its thing of the primary launch. ISRO's trying to make use of that 6 months by providing a platform where you can put some sort of payload and then you will have access to essentially in orbit operation, whatever payload you might want to put in there. It'd be a commercial operation. Again, not quite in place yet. I mentioned Sriharikota as being the only place where rockets are launched into space from Earth, first from India. The second site is being developed in way down south, but the announcement was made. I'm not quite sure how it's progressing, but I'm sure that's also delayed. You will have seen the announcements, perhaps, of recent NASA and European Space Agency going to Venus. Well, ISRO has always had plans for quite a while now, going to Venus, going back to the moon with Chandrayaan-3. The solar mission called Aditya L1 has been on the cards for a long time, waiting to be launched. Mars Orbiter Mission 2. Again, it's all of these missions are there. As soon as things pick up, I'm pretty sure that these missions will come back online. In the Indian Space Station was also announced again at Washington in the IAC 2019. And I think that announcement came as a result of, at that time, the announcement from China about their space station, which, as I'm sure you've been following the news, is in orbit right now with 3 Chinese astronauts that were launched there yesterday. But the Indian Space Station, its announcement was made. I think there's not much of a political commitment, let alone a financial one, so there's no timelines yet. But there are projects that ISRO is working with, jointly with NASA and CNES in France and Japan as well. So there's a lot of stuff. It's just a little bit held up. We'll call it a little bit. It's the point I'm making here is that a lot of it is pretty much all ready to go. It's just when the circumstances allow, there you should see a pretty quick recovery. So in summary, I want to just conclude, as space agencies go around the world, Israel's really suffered the most. Why is that the case? Well, I think I'll leave that for another time. But as I showed you in the charts from the World Health Organization, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully things will recover fairly soon. How soon? Well, it will depend upon the number of people and who they are, what critical role in which project they played. Just to remind you that there is this personal tragedy behind all this. There are going to be people who will have lost. As Dave highlighted, we've lost, no matter where you are, you probably know somebody that you've lost, or indeed you may have lost somebody close to yourself anyway. So in addition to people that just lost, there will be people who have been impacted either through being infected and perhaps the consequences of long COVID, which are still unclear, or perhaps as a result of changes, they have more caring duties perhaps, and are not able to take up their role that they were able to do in the past. And all of that is unclear. Most missions have been delayed by at least a year, some more. I don't think Gaganyaan is likely to hit the target of 2022 for the first human spaceflight. And of course, because it's human rated, it's not something you should hurry. The Space Activities Bill, despite all the issues with it, I think is going to be one of the key factors in the recovery as it comes out of the lockdown in the years in a few months to come, hopefully by next year. So, in conclusion, India space program and activities are in a difficult place, but will recover and will be based on, I think, 4 things. 1, national economic recovery. All nations have that. There's going to be large-scale unemployment. A lot of educational institutions have been held back. So national economic recovery is going to be a key player. The growth of the private sector, which I think will help the national economic recovery, is going to be perhaps the single most factor here, if it's given the freedom to do what it needs to do. And also, I think the fact that China landed a rover and a lander on Mars earlier this year. It's had huge success on lunar rovers. It's carrying on with the space station. All of that will play into the geopolitics that all space programs are party to, and that will motivate the Indian government to make the commitments, the financial commitments, and make sure the ISRO programs come back online quickly. But the key thing, and the final one, is the rate at which it develops. It really depends on the people and the teams and how quickly they can reconfigure themselves to be back into almost normal operation. Dave, I'll stop here. I'm happy to take some questions, and I think I can stop sharing as well.
Okay, Gurbir. Thank you very much. Very good. We've got some questions here. Let me go back to an earlier one. Let's knock down some of this feedback here. There you go. You mentioned it in your talk. Do the Indian astronauts have a particular name, such as the Chinese or the cosmonauts of the Soviet Union?
Vyomonauts. Now, that's the term that I have seen around. What actually will happen, I think the Indian government or the ISRO itself will make a formal announcement. But currently, just as Chinese astronauts are known as taikonauts, Vyomonauts is a word that I've come across, but it's not official in any sense.
Okay, thank you. From Fabrizio, considering all the activities going on, why do you think the BIS India does not exist? Are there space interest groups that may be interested in getting presentations about the BIS in India?
Well, I think this is a good opportunity. If anybody is watching right now, or indeed the recording, and there is an interest, I know there have been people who've tried to set up something like this in India, set something up. Given our new digital online presence, it will be much easier to get things and activities and involvement going. You don't have to visit London. And I find that a bit of a trek just here from Manchester anyway. So I think there's a lot of interest, and I think there's a possibility of building on the experience for us in the UK, of all the experience that exists in India and in the wider diaspora across the world within India. There's some incredibly talented people there. And likewise, I think some of the, particularly the startups as well, can benefit from some of the experience and contacts that we have here in the UK. So if anybody is interested, do get in touch.
Okay, from Bert Wiesgerber, he would like an update on the 4 Indians training, or at the Cosmonaut Training Centre, now back in India, and the status of their training centre in Chalakya.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with this. One of the reasons why India is turning to France and Russia is because the infrastructure for training cosmonauts just does not exist. And Chalakya, this place that's mentioned, is a place that's still in its early stages. There is the whole infrastructure of the human spaceflight that's being developed within ISRO, in terms of the department and the personnel who will operate it. But no, I'm sorry, Bert, I don't have much detail on that site. I will see if I can find out what is developing there, but it will take quite a while. The whole Gaganyaan project was given a funding of, I think it was about 1.2 billion US dollars. And that was to get the first space flight completed, i.e. 3 astronauts per week in low Earth orbit. I suspect it will, because it was just 4 who have been trained, I think it will just be 2 astronauts, probably for a shorter period than a week. But the funding exists for Gaganyaan, probably doesn't cater for the infrastructure requirement. That's going to be an additional level of funding, and that's why I suspect at this stage at least, there isn't the significant evolution of the or development of the human spaceflight infrastructure within India, but they will need one. That's exactly what India's done in the past when it comes to launch vehicles or satellites. It's got cooperation, you have to pay for it. And indeed, in this case, the training of the 4 astronauts in Moscow and the support from Kenden is something that India is paying for. But eventually, because it's quite costly, India will want to develop that. And not least because it's costly, but just because it's something that they will need to do in the longer term. But the current funding is only around for this initial flight. So not more I can add to that. But if I do find something out, Bert, I will, of course, let you know.
Okay, thank you, Gerber. 2 questions from Fabrizio. Which technology influenced more India's aerospace engineering? Western US, Western EU, the UK, Russian or Chinese? And then there's a second one. If you want to do this one first, makes it easier for you.
So great question, Fabrizio. I think the answer has to be Russian, mainly because it was Russia that launched India's first satellite. You all heard of Rakesh Sharma. He flew part of the Intercosmos program. And also the cryogenic engines that used the 3rd stage on the GSLV Mark III. Originally, that technology was through license, purchased from the last few couple of years of the Soviet Union regime before it ended and Russian Federation came into being. So those are the key steps. But I think also I should mention France. There were many engineers who worked at Canes and Toulouse and various sites. And that was a deal done back in the late 1970s with the chairman at the time, Satish Dhawan, who organized this exchange of technology. Indian experienced, capable engineers would work and develop mostly transducers, which are used in various parts of the spacecraft systems. They would build them in France, and they would not get paid. The Indian government would pay them. But instead, there was the technology exchange, and that's where the liquid engines, used on the GSLV Mark II, our technology came from France. But I should also say, really, that NASA was, the USA played a critical part in the initial launch. For example, the Nike Apache rocket, the very first to leave Indian soil to space, came from NASA. And in that case, there was this collaboration between Russia, China, Russia and America. UK also launched some rockets from Thunder. And what was going on there was that Vikram Sarabhai, who was the heading prior to his demise in 1971, who doing a lot of this, he just kept taking support, taking input from wherever it came. So he made use of both Russia and USA. And of course, this was during the Cold War. And it was in Russia's interest to get India, because it's such a large population, very close by geographically, to go towards the political battles that the Russian communism or the American democracy, that was a tug of war, the underlying tug of war. And Vikram Sarabhai played them both really well. So it was exploitative generally, but very collaborative. And that's one of the reasons why India made such a big headway in getting up and getting its space program ready and working in a very short time. And I think this is one of the reasons why, coming back to the Artemis Accords, India has not yet committed itself. I think it's going to see if it can possibly join both the new Chinese-Russian option or the Artemis Accords. So this is something that India did, and all countries, and they're starting out, tend to do. As I was saying, Turkish astronauts going to go to the ISS. There was the UAE astronaut in 2018 who spent some time in the ISS, and that's how countries begin to get their foot in the door of the new technologies associated with space.
Okay, Gurbir, thank you very much. The second one for Brizio and also from Cybertron, two-part really. When is MOM2 scheduled to launch, and are the payloads already defined? And he has a proposal otherwise. Wonder if he has the money. Anyway, is there any updates on MMO2, and will there be a lander or a rover with it?
Right. So the MOM2 is the Mars Orbiter Mission 2. The initial project proposals I saw way back about 3-4 years ago. There was an announcement opportunity asking for payloads. At that time, I think it was just restricted to India institutions, the private sector, and academic institutions, because the stage where it's at, i.e., I don't have a launch date. I know we're always familiar with launch dates being missed, and indeed any project dates within the space program being missed throughout the history of all space programs. But it was going to be just an orbiter, no lander and no rover. But, and here's the thing, I think as a result of what China's done, I think they might upgrade the launcher, the whole project. And they really did do that with Chandrayaan-1. About a year before its launch, they actually added a whole new, much larger vehicle, the impact probe, at a very short notice. So no lander, no rover. As it stands, the payloads, some have been defined, but I think if you've got some ideas, I'm sure they'll be willing to listen. But when it does come back online, I suspect Mars Orbiter Mission 2 will no longer be just an orbiter, but they will have a go at landing. But that's, I think that they need to get the landing on the moon as successful before then. As you all know, in 2019, September, Chandrayaan-2 didn't quite make it to the surface of the moon, and hopefully Chandrayaan-3, which should have taken place already, it's also been delayed, that will be successful. But once India's been successful with lunar landers, there's no reason why they shouldn't go for a lander and a rover on Mars as well.
Okay, Gurbir, thank you. Fabrizio actually suggests that you should write an engineering inheritance article on Indian space projects, and he suggests it maybe for space flight. I say you should do it for Space Chronicle, actually, but we can talk about that later. From the next question, what is the outlook for the Indian Venus mission, given the recent NASA and ESA missions?
I don't know. I think all the details I had were prior to the recent announcement. I suspect the NASA and ESA announcement will have no impact directly on what India was planning. But if nothing else, just like China's activities, I think NASA and ESA's activities will spur on the Indian government to invest and make the political and financial commitments that it needs to make sure that India does not fall behind, because that's usually one of the pressures. So no direct connections, but there are many other programs that India had mentioned, not publicly announced, but I think all of this will help to accelerate what commitments Indian population, the citizens, would like to see, because they would want to see India not fall behind and be part of this exciting phase that we're going through right now. You know, in this decade, right now we have 2 space stations with people on board. We have the first landing other than NASA on Mars, and this rover's right now on the moon. There's just so much happening, and particularly with the new startups in the private sector, it's a whole raft of companies, commercial companies, taking payloads to the lunar surface. I think this astroscale they were offering to take 1 kilogram payload to the lunar surface for $1 million, beg your pardon. So even if you don't want to do this, you've got the money and you want to participate in some way, for the first time, it will be possible. That's where we are in the modern space activities. So I'm sure India won't want to fall behind, whether it's to Venus or elsewhere.
Thank you, Gurbir. Will any of the private aerospace companies in India launch their rocket by the end of 2021?
By the end of 2021, I see that very unlikely. And that's mainly because although the facilities through this Space Activities Bill, ISRO and the general political commitment and this change in culture, ISRO is now opening up to the private sector. That's real. But to get to see a launch before the end of this year, I think it's highly unlikely, but you never know.
Okay. Thank you. Does India have a military space program? What's the link with ISRO?
As I'm sure you all appreciate, every space program now has national and civil and military aspect to it. India was unique. Well, I suppose other than the European Space Agency. The European Space Agency does not have any military aspects, although France and individual nations who are part of ISA do. India originally, it was designed to be a socio-economic motivator. And to a large extent, that's what it was for the first decade or so. When back in 1979, the SLV-3, 1980, the very first successful SLV-3 launcher test flight was conducted, the guy who headed that project was a well-known guy in India who sadly passed away, but Abdul Kalam. And he, as soon as he completed that successful mission, the first launch of an Indian satellite from India with an Indian launcher, he moved over to the DRDO, the Department of Research and Defense Organization in India, which is the MOD, military, Ministry of Defense, as we have here in the UK. So now India has no, ISRO certainly is a civil agency. As you saw in the Gaganyaan mission, the 3 cosmonauts, as with certainly the case with a lot of the American astronauts, and I'm sure in some Russian ones as well, they're former military personnel. But in India, in terms of space assets, other than the Shakti mission, this anti-satellite test that was conducted in late March 2019, it has no military assets as such, other than satellites, communication satellites, which are dedicated for the Indian Air Force, the Indian Navy, and of course the Indian Army. But I'm sure, as with all space programs in every country, there's a lot of people who move between the two sides because that's ultimately being funded by the same source, the national government.
Thank you there, Gurbir. What is the status of the Pragyan rover, Chandrayaan-3, and also LUPEX?
I'm not familiar with LUPEX. I can't add anything to that.
LUPEX.
Yeah, I just don't have any update on that. But Chandrayaan-3 was announced fairly soon after Chandrayaan-2 mission, the lander part of it, which wasn't successful. So because of the quick turnaround time that was announced then, I'm assuming that the Pragyan rover was going to be pretty much the same as the one that went up in Chandrayaan-2. But as with any dates, other than the fact that being absolutely sure there's a delay, it should have happened by the end of, well, certainly by now already, had the original timelines been kept. But they haven't been kept, and unfortunately, because it takes another GSLV-3 launch to get a rover to the moon, I think I've seen a few projected plans for GSLV Mark IIIs, and Chandrayaan-3 is one of the priority ones, but I can't see that happening before the end of this year. Again, just to repeat, it may be the case that it does happen, but judging by the number of the rate of launches, it's very unlikely.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you say anything, this is from Fabrizio, about the Italy-India cooperations? I didn't think you mentioned it in your overview.
No, I didn't. And Fabrizio, that's something I need to learn, perhaps from you at some stage. But no, there have been various payloads coming from various countries, and certainly going back to the 2007, 2008 Chandrayaan-1 mission. There's even a payload from Hungary. So I'm not familiar with any specific projects of collaboration between India and Italy. But I know that India and Israel have a very long history of collaboration in space projects. So I can't add anything to that. It's something that I have to learn. So yeah, do feel free to share with me, Fabrizio, anything that you're familiar with.
Okay, there, Gerber. This is the last question at the moment, and several people have said thank you for your very good detailed replies and your in-depth knowledge of the subject. The last question we've got here is there any information available about the Admire test launch?
I'm afraid not something that I'm familiar with. Apologies.
Okay. And that's it. Has anybody got any more questions at all? Okay. Fabrizio wants you to write to him and be in touch with the right person.
Okay.
And Fabrizio suggests that the history that I did about the society earlier on is put on Spaceflight to explain to new members why this forum is important and understand the reasons behind that. And I said I would do that, and also referenced that history I wrote in the Chronicle some years ago that listed all the papers. There's no new questions for the audience, so thank you again for everybody that's participated, that's been listening, and thank you for bearing with new technology. We're all learning this as we go. This is quite challenging. Watching different screens and doing different things. It's unusual way certainly for me to do this sort of stuff. It's very new. So let's thank Gerber, and I'll come back up there. I hope. There you go. That's ruined the night for you, but there you go. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gerber, and many thanks for everybody who's participated. I do believe we have Alistair back, I hope, or maybe Elizabeth that might want to come in. Then again, maybe not.
And I think for those of who are not in the UK, we've got a football match starting here in about half an hour between Scotland and England. So some people will be drifting off now, ready for that.
This is far more important.
Well,
there's the artilleries are joined in, folks.
Yeah.
I bat for both sides. I'm Hong Kong Scottish. That was excellent. Thank you very much.
Everything.
Yeah, we have to live with it, you know.
Oh dear.
That was fascinating. It's great to know so much about what's going on elsewhere. We tend to be a bit blinkered in what we do and what we say. So that was really fascinating. And all the facts and figures were really quite incredible. Thank you also, Dave, for introductions and for handling the Q&A. And a big thank you to Elizabeth for once again coordinating the evening behind the scenes. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I see we had 49 or was it 50 people from all over the world. In fact, I think the furthest away probably was west coast of the USA. And as close as Milton Keynes and London. Oh no, we've got Rome there, and we've got Holland there as well. So quite a across the world audience. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's talk and want to make a small donation. Please click on the donate button. As I said earlier, every little helps to cover the cost. Our next event is actually tomorrow. Yes, it's Saturday, and it's Saturday here too. So I hope you're all up by 10:30 in the morning, when that's British summertime, because Steve Salmon, well, actually, it doesn't look that summery around here. It's pouring with rain at the moment. Steve Salmon is looking after our branches and is running a BIS branch launch event tomorrow at 10:30. So hope as many of you as possible will join wherever you are, because we think there's a chance for you to start up a new branch. So let's hope we can do that. Now, I hope to see some of you at our Reinventing Space conference in the QE2 Conference Center. on the 28th to 30th of June. It will be socially distanced, so bring your masks. I've got mine. I hope I've got it the right way around. So I hope you'll all be wearing yours on the day. We'll look forward to seeing you there. I think we've got an interesting program with a tremendous number of papers covering a wide range of subjects. And I think we've also got the provisional program up and running now on the BIS website. So have a look at that. Now, 1 or 3 day tickets are available now at a massive final week reduced price, which can save you over £100. And there are further discounts, of course, for BIS members and for students. We'll be presenting the Sir Arthur Clarke Awards at the conference dinner on the 29th. I think we've almost sold all the tickets out now, but we might have 15 or 16 left now that the QE2 Centre has changed the rules to allow 6 people per table. We started off at only 4 people per table, and they've upped it to 6. I think that's in competition with the pubs because they're allowed 6, so why can't we? We will, of course, be holding the BIS AGM on the 30th in the QE2 Conference Centre, and I hope everyone will have sobered up a bit by then. Now, we had an amazing number of entries for the Sir Arthur Clarke Awards, and it's even more incredible that we've got, I think, 25 of the 28 finalists actually coming along to the event on the 29th. So it'll be a great evening. And if you can get there, please do, as we will be celebrating, I think, some amazing feats over the last few months. So I think I'll pull out there because there's an awful lot happening, and we'll let you get away and maybe see some of you tomorrow. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Gurbir, and for Dave for running it, and for Elizabeth for making it all happen. Thanks a lot. See you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Enjoy the